Hello and welcome viewers to a very special interview on this edition of Turning the Page. For more than 3 decades now, Amitav Ghosh has woven multiple threads in a unique narrative style that bind themes such as colonialism, environmental exploitation, and the threat to indigenous cultures. His works cry out for introspection and sensitivity to the elements around us. And the Sundarbans, one of the world's largest mangrove forests and also one that is severely endangered, has been a recurring protagonist in several of his novels, including his latest titled Ghost Eye, which is published by HarperCollins. I'm privileged to be speaking to Amitav Ghosh today. Many thanks, Amitav, for joining us and speaking to us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Many congratulations on your latest work, Ghost Eye. It's a story, quote unquote, of birth, death, rebirth, and the awakening of wonder. So, Amitav, is this book a call to revive the reverence for nature, to ecology, and also revive a culture that has always ascribed divinity to our surroundings?
Yes, I would say that's pretty much it. Except for divinity, I think it's really. I wouldn't use the word divine necessarily, but certainly a profound respect for an understanding of the environment around us.
Do you believe that we've actually failed to internalize this reverence for the environment around us as a society? And is this internalization perhaps the only way that we can safeguard our future?
I don't think it's the only way. I mean, certainly we also have to work on other things like technologies for, producing alternative energy and so on. So all of that plays a part. But unless all of that also is joined to a deep understanding of the importance of preserving the only planet that we have, I don't think they're actually going to succeed. I mean, so long as people harbor this notion that they can escape to Mars or whatever, they're just living in a delusional universe. I mean, those billionaires who talk about that, they're just sick of life on this earth. And actually, they don't know anything about this earth. They don't know how strange and wonderful it is.
Well, we'll talk about that in just a bit. But beginning with the book, it's one that in many ways explores multiple fault lines, does it not, Amitav? Under the larger rubric of the danger to our environment, there's tension between the vegetarian and the non-vegetarian. A significant part of the novel is also devoted to the diversity of fish that Bengalis consume and the manner in which they cook it, with the different ways in which they cook it. There's the skeptic as well as the believer. There's also the radical activist and also a more sober mentor. Now, how would you respond to somebody who might say that environmentalism sometimes displays a tendency to lurch to one extreme?
To lurch to one extreme, you're saying?
Yes.
Well, given the nature of the challenge that we are facing today, I don't see how it's possible not to lurch to one extreme, because the other side, that is the side that's wreaking havoc upon our environment, they are the real extremists. I mean, they stop at nothing. They chop down entire forests for the sake of, some mine somewhere. So, what we are really seeing is a very extreme form of extractivism, of really a sort of colonial form of exploitation that we are now employing amongst ourselves. How is this to be opposed? I don't know. I'm not, I'm not an activist myself, but certainly I can understand why so many young people feel so strongly about this, because they are very aware that, they're heading towards a future where their lives are not going to be sustainable.
Absolutely. And as you write in The Great Derangement yourself, Amitav, your ancestors were themselves ecological refugees. You talked about how your father had once told you that your family was displaced after the Padma River had changed its course way back in the 1850s and drowned out your entire village. And of course, that is now in present-day Bangladesh. There's one estimate that actually says that we here in India could have approximately 45 million climate refugees internally by the year 2050. That's 2.5 decades from now. Have we really, Amitav, woken up to this aspect of climate change outcomes? I ask you this also because you mentioned Cyclone Amphan in Ghostai as well. And that cyclone, which hit us in 2021 in West Bengal, it led to large-scale permanent displacement as well.
I would, to begin with, I would dispute this term climate refugee.
Okay.
I and others who've done, looked into this phenomenon and, tried to understand it. I think most of us really feel that this climate refugee idea is a very reductionist idea, because actually when people leave wherever they are, it's because of multiple factors. It's not just because of one thing. It's almost always tied also to various other kinds of political conflicts or other impacts of various kinds. Secondly, it's very rare, I would say, at least in India, for people who leave their land to go away permanently. So for example, Amphan, Aila, and the Sundarbans. So many people have left. They've gone to work essentially on the West Coast, in that entire coastal belt. Now, a lot of the workers are from Bengal or other parts of eastern India, including Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, and so on. But it would be a mistake to think of this on the model of a migration in the sense of people going off to settle somewhere else. That's not what these people are doing. In fact, they'll, typically your Bengali migrant, who's working in, let's say, Goa, will go for 6 months, make money, go back go back to Bengal, perhaps use that money to buy a little land somewhere where they can build a house, and they'll also keep their spot in the Sundarban. So this is a pattern which we call circular migration.
Okay.
Because it's not a permanent leaving to settle somewhere else. And I think we should be very wary of these, how shall I say, these scare scenarios where we are told that 45 million or 200 million or whatever are suddenly going to up and leave. That's just not a realistic possibility. And in any case, it completely misunderstands the nature of the phenomenon. And instead, it creates a kind of panic among people, which is then turns against migrants and leads to migrants being vilified and so on. So I think one has to be very careful, in one's understanding of what the consequences might be.
So how would you essentially reframe the problem at hand? And how would you redefine or characterize the kind of migration that ensues as a consequence of ecological events or climate events?
Migration, I would say, is never the consequence of just one impact. Usually what will happen is that when you have a cyclone coming in, people will move to safe areas. And then once the cyclone recedes, they'll try and rehabilitate their own villages and so on. Then some people do leave and then they go off. But in fact, migration is a very complex phenomenon. And what drives it even more than climate impacts or environmental impacts is, in the first place, pre-existing networks. So this is something that we see very clearly within the Indian subcontinent. Bangladeshis, for example, they have a long history of working abroad. So because they provided a lot of sailors during the age of sail. They were called lascars, and from the 18th century onwards, they were sailing on European ships. And some lascars would then again set up, little settlements in other places. For example, New York, there's a fine study actually called Bengali Harlem, which traces Bengali immigration into New York. So what actually happens then is that these pre-existing networks enable later migratory flows. So if I traveled around these migration sites in Italy, and I interviewed hundreds of migrants. And it was very interesting to me that most of them from the subcontinent were actually from Bengal, and a lot from Pakistani Punjab. Very few from India, but those who were from India were almost always from the Punjab.
Okay.
Punjab and Gujarat, because Punjab and Gujarat, they have the pre-existing networks, so they tend to be drawn along on these networks. But again, we should never forget that migration to distant places
Sure.
is a tiny fraction of the actual migration that goes on. It's less than 3%. So, these Westerners who are always screaming their heads off about migration, I mean, they really have no understanding of the nature of internal displacements within countries like India. But again, I would say that we have to be very careful about reducing a very complex phenomenon to something very simple.
Understood. You spoke about colonialism in one of your earlier responses. You've also mentioned how in the past the Anglo-American empire was built on fossil fuels. But we in India have also been equally reliant, if not more, on fossil fuels. Now, why do you think, Amitav, colonial history or the narrative of colonial exploitation, which otherwise is very much part of our own discourse about our past, why is it that that particular narrative has not informed our stated objective of transitioning to renewables? Because when we speak about transition to renewable sources of energy, we don't tailor that particular argument in the language of a certain colonial exploitation of the past that relied on fossil fuels, among other means. We usually talk about it in transitioning to cleaner sources of energy and protecting our environment and so on and so forth. So there, it's not a case of history informing the way forward. Why is that?
That's absolutely the case. Look, there is a very good case to be made for some kind of minimal energy availability everywhere, especially for the poor, who need certain. I mean, essentially now, if you look at farming populations in the Indian subcontinent or in Africa, it's a fraction per capita of what people use in the West. But at the same time, people need, there is a basic need for energy. And of course, the whole point is that what we should try to do is to move away from, fossil fuels, especially coal, which is a very dirty source of energy, to alternative forms of energy. And why haven't we done that? Well, there are innumerable reasons, but one very important reason is that, India and China, we happen to have lots of coal and not much gas or not much oil either.
True.
What China has done is actually really interesting because they've established full spectrum dominance over all forms of alternative energy. And they are now installing capacity at a rate which is just absolutely staggering. I mean, ahead of all the rest of the world combined. So why are they doing that? One of the reasons exactly is to wean themselves away from oil and fossil fuels, not just because they love the environment so much, but also because they want to free themselves from the geopolitical imperatives of fossil fuels. Because the Anglo-American empire still largely continues to control the flow of fossil fuels. And that's their primary geopolitical advantage in the world.
So let me ask.
They.
Sure. I mean, I'll ask a very quick follow-up to that, Amitav, because we've witnessed over the last decade or so a very vicious bracketing of those batting for renewables with some kind of a conspiratorial agenda to basically retard development. So drill, baby, drill is in vogue again in political circles, especially in the United States. Windmills are being frowned upon, and we saw an example of this when President Trump spoke at Davos. The Americans have also decided to withdraw from the International Solar Alliance, which was an Indian initiative. Large-scale acquisition of sovereign territory with the express purpose of exploiting resources is also being spoken of in very casual terms indeed. But do you actually see adequate pushback to this attempted revival of empire?
There is a very major pushback. And this attempted revival of empire is precisely a response to that.
Yeah.
Because I think, the Anglo-American elites are beginning to realize that they're losing their grip upon the world. And they've also begun to, they've always known that their empire was founded on fossil fuels. So they're doubling down on fossil fuels. But because on this depends their grip upon their geostrategic grip upon the world. It's essentially a failing project, and it's when a project is failing that you see its greatest weaknesses, and that's what we are seeing. The way that the Anglo-American world comports itself today is a very good case of derangement. They seem absolutely besotted. Trying to restore a project that's now completely hopeless.
Let's come to another issue that is quite divisive. And if I have your permission, I'd like to read this excerpt from Ghostai, and I'll keep it short. That's why these guys who think machine intelligence can replace human thinking are so mistaken. AI just mimics the brain, and that's not where we get our forebodings and premonitions and all the other things we humans can feel. The stuff that gives us goosebumps and makes the backs of our necks prickle. All that comes from the body, the flesh, everything that gives us our humanity. The brain only gets in the way. So, Amitav, you're pushing back against doomsday scenarios about an AI takeover. Tell us more.
Well, if AI is so clever, why does it constantly misspell my name? I just find it hilarious, actually. I find that AI is a very useful tool. And, it does some very surprising things and some very helpful things. But at the end of the day, it's just a tool like any other. I think it will and already has led to a lot of people losing jobs at a certain level. It can do certain kinds of things and it can't do others. Maybe it'll reach some astonishing level where it does everything. But AI is never going to have premonitions. AI is never going to have intuitions. It's never going to have those sort of strange, inexplicable breakthroughs that occur within human intelligence. And human intelligence, again, I would say, is not actually located in your brain at all. Human intelligence really can't function without your gut bacteria. So there is all of that.
Absolutely. A last couple of questions, Amitav. You refer to the rights of nature movements in different parts of the world. Legal victories in countries like New Zealand as well as Ecuador, where rivers as well as mountains were actually ruled as living entities. You refer also to legal cases here in India, where the Ganga and Yamuna rivers have been declared living entities by 2 high courts. However, there's a gap there between the legal assignation and how these rivers are actually being treated in practice. Now, recently as well, we've had a very robust debate, as you would have witnessed, as well as activism that's led to a reconsideration on the fate of the Aravallis here in India. Do you see scope for hope as far as environmentalism goes in our country?
Certainly, I would say that the Aravalli movement has come as a real surprise. Because they've really, it's absolutely galvanized so many young people. And I think that's really interesting to see these school children turning out in such large numbers. And again, I'm old, and I've seen actual environments deteriorating around me. I remember as a schoolboy spending time in Uttarakhand, in the Himalaya, in the mountains. Now, when I see pictures of those mountains, there's not a tree to be seen. It's completely deforested. So young people today have actually woken up to the fact that if this carries on in this way, they're going to enter a doomed landscape. And that's why they are being galvanized in this way. And I don't think we should dismiss their efforts because, the farmers' movement actually did make a dent
True.
in some way. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not Pollyanna-ish about what the future might hold, but I certainly do also think that young people have not given up, and they understand the nature of the problem.
Finally, Amitav, Ghost Eye deals with issues such as dissociative memory, parallel worlds, as well as reincarnation. Has your research into these matters made you appreciative of, or even sensitive or sympathetic towards those who believe in all of this? And if I may ask you, are you among them now?
I don't like to use the word reincarnation because I feel that makes it, that implies that you are committed to believing in a certain mechanism whereby souls migrate from one body to the next and so on. And I don't know if that actually happens. I'm completely agnostic about it. I don't know what is the mechanism, but certainly I do know that a lot of children are born with past life memories. This is indisputable. There's enormous amounts of evidence about it. And we all know people, who've been born with past life memories. These usually surface around the age of 3 and then they fade. So this phenomenon is indisputable. It doesn't, I mean, to note that it happens is not to say that I understand why it happens.
Okay.
But that's true of so many things in the world. And I think for me as a writer, these phenomena such as these are very productive. I mean, we know very strange things happen in this world because after having been on this planet for several 100,000 years, I think our species really doesn't know anything about it. This planet is much, much stranger than we imagine.
I completely agree. Many thanks for that very fascinating conversation, Amitav Ghosh. Really appreciate that you could take time out to speak to us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.